Hi, Russ.
Hi, Shravani. How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. Well, Russell was bad and got kicked out of the field trip at daycare, and all the other kids had to come back. So I'd spent last night coming back from Columbia telling them about juvenile detention and what jail school is like.
That's
So
a little extreme.
I'd like a recommendation in the chat box, like which of the county juvenile detention facilities is the most scary that I should take him to. So I want to get him on the straight and narrow.
Well, we keep saying that my daughter would actually go to baby jail if she doesn't get her act right. We never went that far to talk about juvenile detention.
All right, well, we are just a couple minutes past the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Before I let our speakers take it away, I just wanted to remind folks that if you haven't already, please visit frontiersctsi.org to find out about more resources and upcoming events, and be sure to become a member so that you hear about that news as it is available. I also wanted to give folks the dates of our upcoming sessions. I will drop this information in the chat as a flyer so you can share it with your colleagues and students and others. In July, we are featuring Ann Johnson, who's coming to us from the FDA to talk about running clinical trials under the FDA. She's presented in the region before and is really well received, a great speaker. So that's an exciting session. In August, we're featuring Ann Sales, who's going to be speaking about implementation science. And then in September, we'll hear from Clifford Michaels, who's in the KU Center for Technology Commercialization on innovation and commercialization. So with that, I will turn it over to our host today, Dr. Hoffman.
Great, thanks. I'm Mark Hoffman. I'm the Chief Research Information Officer at Children's Mercy and serve as co-lead of the Frontiers Informatics Core. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Waitman. He earned his undergraduate in electrical engineering from WashU in St. Louis, and then went on to earn his Ph.D. in biomedical engineering at Vanderbilt. Dr. Waitman served as a professor of internal medicine at the University of Kansas Medical Center, as well as serving as the director of Medical Informatics and Associate Vice Chancellor for Enterprise Analytics. He was fundamental in the securing of the Frontiers Translational Science Award for KU and is widely recognized as a leader in using EHR, electronic health record data, to answer clinical and research questions. He's very active and recognized in the PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and established the Great Plains Collaborative, which he'll be discussing some work related to that today. And Russ was also recently recognized by being inducted into the American College of Medical Informatics, a very strong and important distinction in the American Medical Informatics Association. He now serves at the University of Missouri with appointments and roles both in the Columbia and Kansas City campuses, where he leads he's the scientific director of the Tiger Institute and the director of the UMKC Center for Health Insights. So with that, we welcome you to today's talk, Russ, and look forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Sound good? Yeah. All right. What I'm going to do is, and this was a result of going to the CTSA ACTS meeting and seeing Ed Ellerbeck, who said, hey, give us an update on kind of what are some of the things going on in the Greater Plains. And notably, we have an environment that we call the GPC Reusable Observable Unified Study Environment, GROUSE. And so I think people may recall that when I was at KU, because the former dean and executive vice chancellor Barbara Atkinson liked birds, I started naming things after birds. So the GPC, of course, is the Greater Plains Collaborative, but that's just a front for the Greater Prairie Chicken. And so now we have moved on to another bird. This work that I'm going to present is largely pulled from slides from a lot of people, but predominantly from Dr. Sing Song, who is with us at Mizzou, but was formerly trained at UMKC and did a postdoc with us at Kansas. So again, it's a lot of I've got a slide deck. I'm going to run through it kind of quick. So hopefully it's a reference that if Ashley wants to share, we can share with people. And we'll take questions at the end when I drop into a demo of some things that might be useful as a gateway drug for reproducible research. And so I want to present some things, but then I want to really spend time with people so that they know they can work with the team there, with folks like Shravani and Diego, to think about developing both observational studies and prospective studies. So we'll talk a little bit about the landscape of what's happening in kind of the big data space from my perspective, not my global perspective, but a kind of a specific perspective around PCORI and PCORNet, some of the benefits we have in the Greater Plains. We'll use GROUSE then in detail, and then I'll briefly cover some example projects underway more on the observational side. And then I think time will allow, I'll do a very quick demo of a I2B2 like Heron, but it's now working across all the sites in the GPC. So if you've been used to, now I will comment, Heron is much better than Mizzou and the GPC at large. It's got a lot richer data. The team there has tons of experience getting incredibly wealth of data out. But when you go to the GPC level, you get to see how does it look when I scale it across other health systems. So that provides some interesting comparisons for you. So if you're not familiar with this, there is an entity called the Greater Plains Collaborative, of which you are part of here. This is a map of the PCORNet at large, which is this large effort to provide support for comparative effectiveness research and other types of research across health systems, predominantly, that are mostly academic, but also have community partners. And so it's composed of multiple networks. So it's kind of like the country in the sense it's like a republic where there's the United States, but you have states within the United States. And so our network, the GPC, has 13 health systems. You can always quibble about how you count, but if you just count raw patients in people's databases, it's about 30 million people. And GROUSE is going to talk about how we can link that to Medicare, Medicaid patients. And it can be used to support trials, feasibility for trials or for studies, and observational studies. So you can kind of engage in PCORNet from the single site level at home at Mizzou or KU, or you can then supersize and go up and up and up in terms of size and scope. So hold on here a second. I don't know why my slide is not advancing. Here we go. Let's see if I get any lucky. Hold on a second. That is behaving weirdly. There we go. If you're in this large data space, last year, a draft document came out from the Food and Drug Administration called Real World Data, Assessing EHR Records and Claims Data to Support Regulatory Decision-Making for Drug and Biological Products. So while this is FDA scoped, a lot of what we aspire to do in research is to either use studies that incorporate drugs and biological products or develop new things that become new drugs and compounds. And so how the FDA looks at when would real world data be good enough to approve a drug? I mean, that's kind of the grand holy grail question. Is everybody who's ever plugged data into a paper case report form, then maybe you're doing it in REDCap or Encore or Velos, you've asked that question. I'm typing data that was over here in the EMR. Like, when could I just use the EMR data or the insurance data? But this document, we've used their figure because we assume a lot of people will read FDA guidance. And so they include a picture that what happens in the life cycle of EHR data for observational analyses or prospective research is you have the EHR down here at the bottom, and we'll be referencing this picture in the future. So it has all kinds of notes, discrete data, and then you might have a clinical data repository that has your EHR data in it. And you might manually curate some data into there, but then at some point, you may move it up into a data warehouse that follows an open common data model, so it can be comparable across the country. And you may incorporate additional data that fills in gaps like Medicare claims data or birth and death records. So you know that the patient didn't die at KU, but they died later on in life when they moved back to Salina or something. You may also integrate registry data like tumor registries, which we prototyped at KU back over a decade ago to help with NCI designation. Then at the end of the day, someone's going to do an analysis, and typically they're going to want to create a study-specific data set that has the records of the subjects they've selected. So this GROUSE environment, or the process I'm going to talk about PCORNet, is really how it's well positioned to support this vision and scale it from local to a high level. And it can be used not just by learning health systems, but we're open to use also by commercial entities. And we've done a pilot project for polycystic kidney disease led by Utah. So this is a picture, if I just look at the landscape of health data evolution. So I was previously at Vanderbilt, and at that time, we built EMR systems. We integrated best-of-breed systems, and we could do incredible clinical decision support. I did my Ph.D. in artificial intelligence and machine learning. We could do things right in the workflow, but there wasn't much to standardize or interoperable because we didn't even have agreed upon standards like LOINC and RxNorm to codify things. As I moved to Kansas, this is just personal, so it's coincidental with kind of the timing. The HITECH Act passed in 2008, which basically incentivized people with billions of dollars to buy these electronic health records in community settings and at lagging academic medical centers. And then in parallel, the Institute of Medicine proposed a learning health system, and CTSAs started grappling with how to harvest and harness EHR data for reproducible research, similar to what was done at KU with I2B2. PCORNet came along as a funny announcement in 2013, and in parallel, there was a parallel funny announcement to create the All of Us Cancer Initiative and the ACT, Acceleration to Clinical Trial CTSA Network. So at that time, we were in the middle of grappling with how do we standardize data? How do we govern data as it flows from one place to another to a greater degree? How do we work with networks of networks or networks that are funded by different funders? Now, PCORI specifically had a challenge that occurred. There was an individual elected to be President Donald Trump, and he ran on a platform that stated they were going to repeal Obamacare. I don't think he and the opponents of Obamacare cared very much about pragmatic comparative effectiveness and PCORI at all, but it was an innocent bystander because it was authorized by the Obamacare Act. And so there was a serious threat that PCORNet would dissolve and PCORNet with it. So we did a lot of work to get the network much leaner and kind of running on keep the lights on funding, and then sustain it until PCORI was reauthorized in 2021. And it was reauthorized with bipartisan support for a full 10 years. And then we launched into a new funding period after kind of the dust settled on the reauthorization. Which actually that was 2019. Yeah, 2019 in December, right before the end of the year, it got reauthorized. And then there was a transition year or so. And then 2022, we relaunched phase 3 of PCORNet with additional priorities at the national level. And then we in the GPC had specific goals around using cloud infrastructure, continuing to make sure folks have their cancer registries, scale out the ability to access notes, do FHIR, REDCap integration, et cetera. And we had a goal, which we've actually accomplished, to link the VA and Department of Defense data warehouse to our warehouse. I don't have a slide on this, but I'll just plug this, that we have over 1.5 million veterans and active duty military or military dependents, where we can link them between the VA and DoD data and our data and our healthcare system. So if you specifically are interested in that type of research, follow up with us. We've got a group led by Utah, which houses the Vinci project, the infrastructure for VA research, who would probably love to talk to you. And Dr. Song also, Sing Song works in that space too. So if we looked at PCORNet originally as a highly distributed network, it was designed so that all the data stayed largely at the site. which had some benefits and limits. It had the benefit of you didn't have to worry about data movement governance, but each site had to stand up all the infrastructure. And largely initially, we were limited to just using SAS to do analysis and create study-specific data sets. So this is pretty much the figure from the FDA reinterpreted from a PCORNet standpoint. And originally, it was fully de-identified, though it's moved over the years to limited data sets. An example of a study done that used the fully distributed approach was a very large bariatric study comparing 3 types of bariatric surgery and doing analyses largely at the site level, but then bringing back aggregate results at the national level to figure out which type of procedure is best. And that was pretty neat. We got that done pretty quick across very large patient populations. And actually, let me comment on that for a second. Whenever you think about big data research, you're like, oh my goodness, millions of people, 100 million records down here, right? By the time you get done defining your inclusion-exclusion criteria, for most clinical observational research, your population is going to be much, much smaller. You need to draw from a very big pool to get down to the people you actually want to compare. So as you think about that, the nice thing about that is if you're scared about how much it's going to cost to analyze the data, if you write good code and you're efficient in how you select, we have found right now in our new environment, it's actually very affordable for people to conduct analyses. So don't be scared. There are some methods that are very expensive, like deep learning or large language models. But I think for a lot of what typically people want to do, it's very manageable. So that was kind of the example number 1, classic PCORNet distributed. And then we moved to what Mei Lu led, which was we said we want to do machine learning, and we may need to put all the data together and make an analytics set that's unified across sites. And so GPC sites were comfortable with sharing data centrally, as or other partners like Pittsburgh. And so here's an example of her R01 work that was able to do advanced machine learning across hundreds of thousands of folks with a pooled environment. Now, PCORNet, and this is the beginning of GROUSE, part of the requirement from the beginning was we had to have a strategy on how we would integrate claims. And if you look back at that GPC map, we cover so many different states with so many different insurers. We said we would do a fallback option, which is we would just buy and show we would do a good job of integrating Medicare and Medicaid data. And so that allowed us to do a project where we could link the Medicare data to the cancer registry data and the site clinical data marks and do an analysis of molecular testing and targeted therapies across 86,000 patients, and really find that if you enrich your data with Medicare claims, you really increase the rate of your ability to detect testing significantly, and also treatment. So moving into phase 2 or 3 of PCORNet, we moved our environment that was on premise at KU to the cloud, which we have KU has an awesome team, but you would face these struggles of someone would want to propose to do a machine learning project, and you'd have to scratch your head with IT and folks like Jeremy Pennington and InfoSec and say, like, how am I going to stick this card in this box? Do I have to buy additional equipment? And when you move to the cloud, that's easy. You just instantiate more computing instances you need. It's worked really well. We aligned with Cerner's vision at the time, now Oracle, although probably they want to re-architect this a little bit, of Snowflake as the database technology running on Amazon. It's also supported on Azure and Google Cloud, and it has worked outstanding. It has a unique angle that we're looking to do with new GPC partners and potentially in this very large National Institute on Aging proposal for Alzheimer's, which is you could, instead of shipping data to the consumer, so if you go back here to May's picture, where someone had to ship part of their data to Mei Lu at KU, or here where we ship data into GROUSE, it's possible that a data provider could share their data, but not have to actually ship it. So that, I think, is going to create a lot of flexibility for people and reduce the copying of data is our hope, but it's kind of a bleeding edge thing for folks. So now we have GROUSE. So this is our GROUSE 2.0 or phase 3. And so if you want to write a grant to use this, or if you want to work in our cohort areas and you are a strong analyst, we can put you in this environment where sites still have most of their data at home, but they put into Snowflake, we manage it, or they could move to the model where they just share it with us. We have a copy of the CDM, the registry, and then we have the linkage to the Medicare claims data. What's nice too is we can stand up workbenches in AWS that are highly secure that let us have a Windows workstation with SAS or a Linux environment with R, or a Jupyter notebook here, or an NLP package there that we can stand up in this environment for people. And it only costs money once you spin it up. When you're done, you turn it off and you save a lot of money. We also use this environment for managing the tokens that allow us to de-identifiably link people across resources and share that with the VA. I'm going to skip over this slide. This kind of just shows and talks a little bit about like a VA linkage. Actually, I will mention one thing on here. We're similarly using Snowflake sharing. We're very close to finalizing the beginning of a project with a company called Axiom that's based now in California, but started in Arkansas, that hosts all the consumer purchasing data with other publicly available data. So they have social determinant data at the individual level where they know how much they think you make, whether you rent or own your house, how old your car is. So you can look at transportation needs, what their medical interests are. And we're going to start to pilot that type of data linked to EHR data and claims data. We have a pending proposal on this to NIH, and then others have similar ones led out of Utah. So as we get results back on that, that'll be really exciting to share. But the sharing technology, I think, will really facilitate that type of integrating data outside healthcare data. So in summary, we think, we've got a pretty good strategy for both how we help learning health systems work, informatics work across health systems and medical centers and CTSAs. And what's nice about the PCORnet space is it's been a place where there's PCORI funding, there's PCORI projects, but there's also the ability to reuse that for other types of research and use it for studies as well with all kinds of investigators and even industry partners. Now I'm going to go a little more into detail. So these, I believe, are pretty up to date. So as we expanded PCORnet in phase 3, we picked up 2 sites in GPC. We picked up WashU BJC. We picked up Houston. And we noted that Intermountain Healthcare has expanded significantly. So I'll show you, this is kind of where we have penetration of people in the country now. And if we were to look at like where the penetrance is of the population, this is where we're densest in terms of coverage of the total population. So as I mentioned, PCORI from the beginning, when we were funded, we had to have complete and comprehensive data by compiling insurance data as well as EHR data. And we had to pick a rare disease, a common disease, and obesity / healthy, unhealthy weight. So we have kept this project alive because it's kind of the IRB of record for our ability to incorporate Medicare claims data. We have 2 older years of Medicaid. So if you do have a Medicaid project, we could potentially look at that. But I would say as we look at the cost of buying additional data, we focus largely on the Medicare adult population. So I'm going to talk a little in detail now about this work. This is largely Song's work as she assumed kind of the keeper of GROUSE. Yahia Muhammad, who I see also on the call, as well as Diego Mazzati, have been working in this environment. So you have people also here in town who you can chat with also. So again, we keep these alive. The overall protocol looks at the development, treatment, and progression of these 3 conditions. And then we also use it to look at data quality issues. So Yahia Muhammad, who's a graduate student here at UMKC, that's his area of focus. And we could also look at healthcare utilization issues. So there's a paper on that if you're interested. This is just pointing out that we collect data across these states, although we're now going to be picking up more states. We're going to be looking to pick up parts of Illinois and Michigan and broaden out to pick up parts of the Intermountain West. So what is important here as a take home is, as we've now received this new purchase of data, we have a 10-year cohort of statewide Medicare data, especially that you can look at linked to health record data. We have data like Part A data of what's happening in largely institutions. Part B data, which is kind of outpatient non-institutional data, so professional services by physicians and CPT codes, but also durable medical equipment and outpatient testing bills. We have Part C data, we have new Medicare Advantage data coming in, and we have Part D drug benefit data. We also have older Medicaid data that right now we haven't used very much. If you want to look at Medicare, you may think they're all over 65. And while that is the majority of them, there are a number of folks who are disabled. So you actually have a considerable population under 65 you can also study. And also people who qualify due to renal disease and ALS are also covered by Medicare, which is very beneficial for the fact that we have an ALS project. I will skip over this slide. And so here you see kind of our expansion to pick up some more states worth of data. And particularly if you are concerned about Michigan, we didn't buy all of Indiana because it would have hit a limit on how many cases we can buy of carrier outpatient physician activities, but we purchased most of Illinois. And then this is a slide for your reference later, just about there. It is quite an elaborate process to obtain this limited data set of Medicare data and the data privacy safeguards you have to go through to obtain that data and maintain it. The good news take home for you is because we followed updated procedures by Medicare, it is thought now that our data has been self-attested and reviewed by their contractor, subsequent reuse for other people should go faster than before. And we shall see. This is just in an architectural standpoint. There was a lot of work involved to configure the cloud and Amazon to meet the goals for obtaining federal Medicare claims data. And our use of AWS and Snowflake have proved very cost-effective and scalable. This is a slide. Everybody has to have an informatics slide with a lot of circles and cylinders on it, and this is ours. You don't need to memorize this, but you should just note, similar to the vertical picture, data comes in on the left, it hops out on the right, and you can see here that we support different ways people can use it. So we have things where you get an account, you are part of the IRB to access things in these analytic workspaces where you're looking at Medicare data plus EHR data. But we also have the ability in certain spots, and now I will show you if we have time at the demo, you can look and start to explore data using I2B2 right now across the GPC sites. This is kind of a process as well to be aware of that's published openly on GitHub, that if you're interested in how we're transforming Medicare data into a common data model, you may be interested in collaborating there with the team under SONG. And then this is a figure from the paper as well that talks about how we securely have the sites send their data to Medicare, not to us, so we can do the linkage, but we never know who the people are at the end of the day when we compile all the data together. To just give you a high level estimates on the population, we have about 30 million people where they are in our EHRs. Of those, about 13 million are in the Medicare beneficiary cohort. And when we crosswalk between these groups, so these are the Medicare beneficiaries in our states, and the intersection with our overall population means we have about 3 million people with both EMR and Medicare data. And here's examples of the cohort sizes that we can study. This is a slide for your reference later, but basically as you look at different populations, there are different pros and cons, right? So if you look at the intersection of the claims and the EHR, you get the most complete data, but you need to think about the fact that the drug exposure is duplicated between the prescribing table in the EMR and the drug exposure coming back from the insurance claim, for example, or the procedure code for the activity in the EHR is replicated in the billing data. There are other pros and cons to looking at a Medicare-only population versus an EHR population. And that's actually an area of kind of research in and of itself, is what happens from a data quality perspective or an analytic perspective when you blend data sources. This is a picture from some demonstration work by Song, just saying in general, does the patient have a diagnosis between the crosswalk pile versus the EMR pile? Crosswalk means they have Medicare data. it's almost one-to-one concordance. So we see consistent diagnosis across both. But if you're looking at Medicare exposure, if you can link to insurance claims data, you're going to find a lot more cases with drug exposure outside of just the purely Medicare exposure space. And you'll see as well documentation of how well can we look at statuses in terms of live, dead, and being in various state locations. Okay. Apologies there. Flip back. Okay. This is a picture just showing you if you want to work with this type of data, we basically have two, at the end of the day, processes you need to go through. There's a data sharing agreement, which everybody at KU and MU have signed, and it defines processes where either faculty at those places or people externally who want to work with us sign an additional yellow agreement. They then can piggyback. If they just want data from the sites, they basically go through a data request oversight process that's pretty efficient and streamlined to access site level data from GPC sites or use this GROUSE environment that's kind of here. If they want to also look at or only look at the Medicare data, there is another process you have to go through with what's called ResDAC, and that's the Research Data Assistance Center that supports requests for Medicare data and Medicaid data. So just telling you, we can work you through this, but there are different processes that govern access to either claims data or EHR data or going through the processes to use both. We're right in the middle of a process to update the environment. And so we're this was presented in early May, end of April. So we're in the process of we now have received all the Medicare data. We are in the process now of staging it. So we're really down here. So Song's picture, I just want to say bottom line is we've received all the Medicare data. We've received many of the sites data, but we're a little behind on finalizing the linkage of all the data. But this just gives you a feel for, we want to do this at least once a year. And there are a number of steps that have to happen and all the sites have to share the data. This is just showing you another pilot example. I kind of commented on this before, but just looking at large groups of people and then looking across how many people, when you actually look at linking to claims data, how that consort picture drops down into a molecular testing population relative to a treatment cohort. I'm going to skip over that. We did prior work that was mentioned in the one paper where we looked at obesity across, or I should say healthy versus unhealthy weight across all of the GPC and kind of characterized the population sizes available for analyses. And in that paper, we highlighted that actually, as you look at data more contemporaneous with GPC, it's higher than regional and national estimates prior. It's underdiagnosed. So if you look at the data, there are very few people who are diagnosed with it relative to looking at their EHR records of BMI. And if you can link the two, you get a better accuracy. And notably, if you look for comorbidities, a lot of common comorbidities for obesity go underdiagnosed in acute care EHR environments. So sleep apnea may be dramatically underreported, let's say, in a population having orthopedic surgery. And so you really learn about those relevant comorbidities often by integrating claims data. This is one, I'm going to try to do it justice from Song, really, and her R01 kind of builds on this, which is how do neurologists take care of ALS patients? And is that different when they have specialized care versus general care more? And so this is kind of looking at a cohort of how do we know how many people we have at the time we did this work, how many people have at least one claim, how many have two claims, and how many have at least 1 year of data before their first claim, because we kind of want to catch people who didn't have ALS and then start to look at them when it looks like they first had ALS. So again, it's a rare disease, but then when you additionally impose these windows on the data, you wind up with a smaller set than you think when you start out with so many people. And in general, this will flip. The highlights on the initial pilot, which is now being tested deeper on the R01, is the people with neurology treatments on a more frequent basis have a lower mortality rate and hazard ratio than the general populace. So we think at a KU where you have an excellent ALS center, well, wow, That's obvious, but it's interesting to understand, like, what are they doing that isn't, there aren't a lot of people who can't make it to an ALS Center of Excellence like KU. So how can we learn what the techniques are being done by these multi-specialty neurology clinics that can be shared and promoted in the general populations that can't reach such a center? And so that's kind of the focus of this type of work, is trying to do machine learning to really understand what's happening in the population on the real world data, and what are some of the factors that may be modifiable that could help increase longevity. I'm going to skip over some data quality work here. I do want to highlight, we have a new paper just accepted to the Obesity Journal that looked at data across 10 of our health systems for a drug that's kind of popular, semaglutide, Wegovy, Ozempic, and the trials are very promising on 10 to 15, 20% weight loss. We just wanted to see not the percent weight loss, but we were interested in, like, what factors promote weight loss or inhibit weight loss from a machine learning perspective. So we extracted a bunch of features, predominantly looking at diagnosis comorbidities and drug exposures, and used machine learning and analysis to kind of find populations where we could observe them for at least a year and see what was happening with weight loss, which was much less than what happened in trials. And then what other factors might promote or inhibit weight loss. So being a diabetic inhibits it, being female promotes weight loss. And so we are looking forward to doing further work in this area. And of note, I would say at the time we did our analysis, most of the cases we were looking at were using the drug for diabetes treatment. So the dose was a little lower, in fairness to the drug. And because diabetics were excluded from the weight loss trials, it is a different population. So I think the real world evidence will be very important to understand, as that drug is used widely among a lot of pre-diabetics as well as diabetics. Seeing what the promise is relative to the reality, it will be a really nice area to work in, as well as expansion to other subpopulations that typically aren't involved in weight loss studies. So that's kind of some of the key presentations I wanted to share. I just wanted to close with, if you're trying to think about, like, a lot of this stuff, you look at it and you're like, I get this presentation, and you're like, I like to touch and feel things. So I wanted to promote, we have reinstantiated the ability to go request I2B2 access. So we have a form now on the GPC website where you can go back and you can say, I want to use, just at least to start to explore the healthcare data. We can now support that again across the network. And we have further information here, but you can now sign up for an account as faculty, or you can sponsor your staff and students to browse data across the GPC. And so with that, I'm going to just hop to that and then take questions. So I'll show you what that looks like. So you probably are going to be very familiar with that for the Heron users at KU, as well as others at UMKC who used to use HealthFacts. Let me try this again. You'll go to this URL. I'm already authenticated. And what will happen is, now this will break because I'm trying to do a live demo. But you'll see here, you largely, except for UMKC, MU people, you won't have this other option. But there's a new GPC data lake that right now has our older data that we haven't refreshed yet. And so the interface is going to look very similar to you. But if you had looked at I2B2 before at like the Missouri level or the KU level, you may be used to looking at numbers that are much lower. So MU, if we log in there, we're looking at a little under 1 million people where we have diagnosis codes, or a little over when you combine ICD-9 and 10 drug exposures in this range. Whereas when you now look at this level, a much, 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 much bigger level of studying a population. And so these are past queries I can see that people have been running. And let me see here. If I was looking at, I was on a call or somebody was wondering about, here you go, kidney transplant. Let's see if this runs. How many people have kidney transplant status in their EHR combined with a creatinine clearance? And so what you can do now is you can look at that And from a feasibility standpoint, we have a transplant. There's actually a grant that got submitted, I think, this month by WashU, working with Iowa, working with Song at MU, looking at integrating the transplant registry with the claims data and the EHR data. And so they were wondering about what they could start to do in follow-up. And so you can start to see, well, here are our sites in GPC doing transplants. And if you were wanting to know how many had at least more than one creatinine, that's a pretty good sized population. And what you'll notice here is I'm reusing queries from before, but these queries actually run in a manageable amount of time. So I will maybe run one de novo for people, but this query was very fast. It took 42 seconds. I will throw it to the audience. Anybody have a diagnosis and procedure they're interested in? And let me monitor the chat. Or Ashley, can you check the chat? What are people chatting about? If they're still awake.
Nothing in the chat right now.
Anybody got anything? Diego, somebody throw me a bone. Anybody have any group they want? Christy, anybody you
I
want
would
to look
always
at?
say sleep apnea and CPAP, Russ.
Okay. So you know what I might do is you might say sleep apnea ICD-10, right? So you would say
G47.3.
G47.3. All right. So here we go. We're going to go look G47.3. You know, if you're a billing guru, you'll know that, well, we won't get the old people, but we'll get the new people. So sometimes the window takes a little while, but it is still pretty cool to say, I'm going to look for G40. You said G47.3? Yep.
Correct.
Okay. Sleep disorders. And we'll just pick the whole bucket. And then what your CPAP exposure is what?
I think it's 94960, but I'm not super.
Okay. You think it's 94960? We'll poke around. And oops, I hit the wrong button.
If you have HitFix codes, that one that you showed on Google should work too.
Okay. $94660. That looks pretty good. Let's take a look. So I'll show you another way you can look for things. We can search by codes. So let's see how many we get. And then we can look at things. What's happening across sites? What's their gender? What's their race? What's their vital status, age breakdown? And I'm going to really give the computer a lot of workouts. What are their other top comorbidities and drug exposures? So this may take 3 minutes or so, or I might break it. But in general, it's been running reasonably well. And when you consider how big of a population we can now draw from, it's quite remarkable. So I will stop officially presenting, and I'll take any questions about GPC, about the CoreNet, about GROUSE, about I2B2. I'll plug that Diego and Song have worked on a broad pragmatic study for PCORI that will reuse some of this infrastructure, as well as Jeff Statlin working with Song have also put in a proposal for these broad pragmatic PCORI studies. I've promoted this to other folks, but as a reminder, these happen 3 times a year. And there is a new category called Category 3 for using PCORNet. And the budget for PCORNet focused things go up to $10 to even $12 million. Any comments or questions? I'll turn that off. I'll pull it up in a second. No questions? Everybody is good? Christy Williams, are you there? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Are you the Christy Williams formerly of Kansas as of Iowa? Is that the
Yeah, I'm back. I've been back for a while.
Oh, great. Well, wonderful. Great to see you.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Are you still working in the Alzheimer's space?
I am.
Okay. Yeah, I would just comment while we're waiting to get people thinking. There is a large effort going on right now to be responsive to a National Institute on Aging proposal for creating a real world data platform. And so PCORnet is trying to help multiple people respond to this announcement. And we've been talking with Jeff Burns and Diego Times. It's getting kind of focused down, but we're hopeful that somehow we will pull together either a response by our team working with Johns Hopkins or others working with other teams that will also be kind of very similar of creating huge real world data. So I'll also put that in chat.
Great.
Other comments or questions?
So Russ, I have a comment. So do you have any plans on also providing the mapping to OMOP in the future, or is this going to be an effort that's going to be based on each site alone instead of like an effort that from all the data that's being put together being standardized to OMOP?
Okay, you are a plant, of course, Diego. If you look at this, how on earth did this work, right? So we're using the PCORnet Common Data Model, but we have run an I2B2 query across all 13 sites, right? So look at that. That ran in less than 3 minutes to be able to not only do an analysis and know we have 83,000 people, but we have all this descriptive analytics that we can look at in less than 3 minutes, right? The way that happened is Vasanthi on the call, who leads our software development team with Abu Mosa on the call, have devised a method where they can take the PCORnet Common Data Model and kind of put a wrapper around it so it looks to I2B2 like it's sitting in an I2B2 Common Data Model. And so that allows us then with Snowflake to host 13 health systems data where they don't have to do any extra work to be I2B2 compatible. And we're working right now to rejoin the ENACT network, which is the new federated network. And we're doing it initially on behalf of MU and WashU. And we can support WashU, who doesn't want to support I2B2 anymore, because we've wrapped it on the GPC. So I'm going to say, like at KU, you may be joining directly, but if it got to be a hassle, we could wrap I2B2 around the PCORnet CDM so you can participate in that I2B2 based collaboration. And similarly, Vasanthi, are you there or are you burnt out because you've been working in the midnight oil? So Vasanthi is now with her team tackling the exact same challenge of how do I wrap the I2B2 common data model tables so they look like OMOP to OMOP tools. And so if you've ever heard of this, I will show people. There is what Diego's referring to is if you look at the PCORnet, it has underpinning it what's called a common data model that I referenced before. And this common data model has a specification of how the tables are to be designed and connected to one another. So you'll see that there is these are all release notes, but there is a little picture in here that shows you here are kind of the main underlying tables in the PCORnet common data model. There's a demographic table and a dispensing and a prescribing table and procedures, etc. Well, another common basis of collaboration is called the Odyssey Consortium, and it uses the OMOP common data model. And if you Google that, you will see that it looks very much like the I2B2 common data model. So here we have people who have death, they have drug exposures, procedures, measurements, and so forth. So Vasanthi has already, how many tables have you done so far, Vasanthi, to move over so that OMOP thinks it's OMOP?
Yeah, we have 5 tables: person, observation, visit, condition.
So she's working through wrapping it so that it will look like OMOP to OMOP, and she's running Achilles on it right now, and also the Atlas exploratory tool. So we are hopeful that by maybe end of summer, we can start piloting not just using I2B2 against this, but actually OMOP. And for me, that's critical for two things. One is, as I work on this Alzheimer's proposal with Johns Hopkins and others, we want to use OMOP as our destination common data model, so we can include more partners than just PCORNet sites. So critically, I need to get that done. And I also think some of the OMOP tools are useful. The other thing that we're doing jointly with KU and Iowa and Nebraska is we're submitting a response to that All of Us network I mentioned before that's doing cancer work. I think Mario is on and Dean Ojo. And so they're working hard to make it so that 4 of our states in the Midwest are part of this All of Us initiative here. And that's going to require that we can take our data and put it in the OMOP standard. So whether that gets funded or not, I just want to get this plumbing work done. But yeah, we are on track to be fully OMOP compatible as well. Now, I will make a comment that if you were to look at our I2B2 at MU, you will notice we have some folders of data like vital signs and clinical observations that are not yet standardized and exposed across all of our PCORNet sites. Although, gee, it looks like, is Saber working on the vital signs right now, Vasanthi?
Yeah, we're working on it. It should be there in a couple of days.
Oh, so see, it's an evolution. It's kind of like when I was saying on that prior slide deck that, you can run really fast when you don't have to standardize anything with anybody else. So like when we first got the KU with Dan Connolly and Tamara, we ran really fast at being able to rip stuff out of the EMR. But when you want to make it so other people can be apples to apples with you, it takes more time, but we're on that path. So that is a great question, Diego, and something to stay tuned on. The other comment related to that, if you work at all with Oracle Health, formerly known as Cerner, is they have, and I was talking with Mark Hoffman previously, they have a learning health network that is also moving to be OMOP compatible instead of proprietary. And that will be very powerful because then their data is also going to be able to plug and play with more of our academic research data. And we notably are trying to work with them to be a data partner in our response to this large Alzheimer's initiative. Oh, and actually, I'll just share that screen, if it didn't catch people. So that query ran in under 3 minutes, and it does provide at a glance some very interesting things that you can start to explore as you think about doing a project around sleep apnea, as well as think about where there are partners where we have complete data. Now, you'll notice some very low counts here. This to me means maybe not that there's a problem where they just don't see people with sleep apnea on CPAP. My suspicion is WashU has problems with their billing data that may need to be explored, but it does start to get you a sense of what population may be available to support your research. So with that, I'll keep going. Any other questions or comments people have? I think we may have one in the chat. Oh, just a thanks from Mark.
Another thing too related to that specific question, Russ, is that maybe that's not really the only code that we are seeing for CPAP, and depending on how people use their codes. So that's another kind of issue, but that's very nice and very exciting to see how fast you can run some of those queries. So that's pretty good stuff.
And Diego, do you want to comment upon some of your work looking at CPAP and sleep apnea using GROUSE?
Yeah, so we've done the study, which we are almost ready to submit using only the claims data. And then we look at claims for CPAP, which also use some of the DME claims, which kind of help us to determine adherence for CPAP. So if someone gets lots of DME claims for mask refills and for hoses, we assume that they are more adherent to therapy. So that way we were able to determine groups of exposure that were based on how many claims that they got in a year. And then we found very strong in associations that as we were expecting about greater utilization of CPAP and lower all-cause mortality and lower major incidence of major risk cardiovascular events. So this was very nice, and we didn't even use the crosswalk cohort that linked the data from the EHR. And then as part of this PCORI proposal that's currently under consideration, we are planning to potentially bring in more granular information about their CPAP exposures, including data from telemonitoring from companies such as ResMed. So one of the proposed goals is to try to bring those external data sources that will give us much better granularity of the CPAP exposure. So then we can do much more like robust research, traditional research, and then building from the framework to allow us to do like prospective, more pragmatic trials in the future. So that's also very exciting perspectives, and specifically for PCORI, like now sleep health is one of the areas of focus from PCORI funding. So it's a pretty exciting area for our group here in sleep.
Well, thank you for sharing that with folks, just to give people an idea of some of the things that could be done. So like you're pointing out there, you start with the foundation of solid data, solid insurance claims integration, but then you kind of add the special sauce of the ResMed dense physiological signals, or think of other unique elements you may bring in. That's a great example. Any other?
And for those
go ahead.
here at KU, I just want to mention that as part of like some of our new efforts from the Division of Medical Informatics, we hired a research analyst is getting trained on how to work on GROUSE. So if you are interested in any new studies and you would like to partner with us, we are happy to provide some level of support to at least get you kick-started until you learn the systems, and then you can kind of like become independent on using the systems and proposing new work. But if you want to learn more, just reach out to me, and then we can schedule a meeting to discuss.
Terrific. Any other comments or questions people have? Well, if not, I want to thank everybody for the chance to come back and present. And thank you again, Mark, and look forward to future collaborations with everybody.
And thank you, Russ. We really appreciate your presentation.
All right. Well, have a great day.
Thank you.